This is Reuters.
A Hong Kong-flagged container ship set off from Ukraine's Black Sea port of Odessa on Wednesday. It's a test of Russia's threat to attack shipping after it abandoned a deal last month, allowing Ukraine to export grain. The departure of the Joseph Schulter vessel followed a new Russian attack on Ukraine's grain export infrastructure. Russian airstrikes damaged grain silos and warehouses at one of the Danube River ports, the governor of the Odessa region said, releasing these photos. The president's chief of staff named the port as rainy. There was no immediate comment from Moscow. Russia has made regular airstrikes on Ukrainian ports and grain silos since pulling out of the UN-backed deal in mid-July, and has threatened to treat ships leaving Ukraine as potential military targets. On Sunday, it fired warning shots at the Palau-flagged Shukru Okan ship travelling towards Ukraine. Moscow said the captain had failed to respond to a request to halt for an inspection. Kyiv called it a gross violation of international law. Despite the threats, Ukraine last week announced a humanitarian corridor in the Black Sea to release cargo ships that had been trapped in its ports, pledging full transparency to make clear they were serving no military purpose. Moscow has not indicated whether it would respect the shipping corridor, and shipping and insurance sources have expressed concerns about safety. Ukraine is a major grain and oilseeds exporter, and the United Nations says its supplies are vital to developing countries where hunger is a growing concern.
The raft of new felony charges against Donald Trump in Georgia, accusing him of illegally conspiring to overturn the results of the 2020 election in that state, are being met by the accused with a new promise that he will reveal on Monday, August 21st, what he's calling an irrefutable report on election fraud in Georgia that should result in, quote, complete exoneration for him and his allies in courts.
The indictment alleges that rather than abide by Georgia's legal process for election challenges, the defendants engaged in a criminal racketeering enterprise.
Trump and 18 other defendants were hit with 41 criminal counts late Monday night in a sweeping case brought by Georgia's Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, including racketeering charges, which are usually used to target organized crime. In a social media post Tuesday, the former president said the findings of his report would be made at a major news conference at his home in New Jersey. That promise was met with immediate pushback from another Republican. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, who has long refuted Trump's claims, responded, the 2020 election in Georgia was not stolen, and that no one for 3 years has come forward to prove fraud in a court of law. Outside the Fulton County Courthouse Tuesday, this man was laying flowers to thank District Attorney Willis. He didn't give his name.
A lot of people, they get scared and they don't do anything, but I think Fani is doing it.
In addition to Georgia, Trump is facing federal charges in Florida and Washington, and state charges in New York.
We love you, Donald!
He remains the dominant frontrunner in the Republican presidential primaries. A Reuters Ipsos poll released in early August suggests about half of Republicans would not vote for Trump if he was convicted of a felony.
This charred rubble is all that remains of taxi driver Kyat Ma and his wife Daisy Lou's home. It's been 1 week since a wildfire ravaged their resort town of Lahaina on Hawaii's Maui Island, killing at least 100 people and leaving a trail of destruction.
I get a chance to come back.
Ma was one of the few able to return to his home to assess the damage.
It not just me lost everything. Everybody. Everything is gone.
The couple are now staying indefinitely with family on the outskirts of Lahaina. Like many others, they are traumatized by what has happened and what they've lost. They're also facing the prospect of precious tourist dollars evaporating. The couple have been driving private taxis on the island for 20 years, putting everything into their house, and now it's all gone.
Because so many years we put all hard working that we have in that house, everything. We have no chance to take anything out. It's no warning, no nothing, and we on the road working, But thank God I have my husband and I still survive,
Other Maui residents have grown weary from living off relief supplies.
No he podido dormir.
This woman, who fled the fire with her daughter, says she's been barely able to eat or sleep in the days since the fires. Adding to the local frustration, few residents have been permitted back into Lahaina to visit their properties. Many are still waiting for news about their missing loved ones. As of Monday, police said only 3 of the deceased have been officially identified. The fire destroyed or damaged more than 2,200 buildings, most of them residential, and, according to officials, caused an estimated $5.5 billion in damage. President Joe Biden has said he would like to visit Maui as soon as possible.
North Korea says Travis King, the U.S. Army private who dashed across the border from South Korea last month, wants refuge from racism and mistreatment in the U.S., either in the north or in another country. This is the first time Pyongyang has publicly confirmed King crossed over the heavily guarded demilitarized zone on July 17th. The North's official state news agency, KCNA, posted on its website that during an investigation, quote, Travis King confessed that he had decided to come over to the DPRK as he harbored ill feeling against inhumane maltreatment and racial discrimination within the U.S. Army. He also expressed his willingness to seek refuge in the DPRK or a third country, saying that he felt disillusioned with the unequal American society. DPRK stands for the North's official name, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. KCNA also said King was kept under control by soldiers in North Korea and that the investigation they mentioned is still active. U.S. officials believe King crossed the border intentionally while on a civilian tour of the joint security area between the two Koreas, and have declined so far to call him a prisoner of war. U.S. officials also say the North has not provided substantive responses to their queries on King. The Pentagon said it could not verify the North's version of King's comments as KCNA had reported them, and said it remains focused on his safe return. King previously faced 2 allegations of assault in South Korea, pleading guilty to one of those allegations, as well as damaging a police car during a profanity-laced tirade against Koreans, according to court documents. After finishing military detention in South Korea, King was taken to the airport to return to his home unit in the United States. He was supposed to face more disciplinary measures upon arrival, but instead King left the airport, joined a tour of the border, and crossed the DMZ despite attempts by South Korean and US guards to stop him.
Is China facing a deeper and longer-lasting slowdown in growth? From retail sales to industrial output, July's numbers fell short of expectations. Some fear the country's economy could be reaching a crunch point. So, how much worse can the slowdown get? China's been here before. Alarm bells over growth went off during the 2008 global financial crisis, and again in 2015. To cope, Beijing boosted infrastructure investment and encouraged property market speculation, but that created debt. And the property bubble has already burst. Now there's really only one source of demand to tinker with. That's household consumption. So why is that so important? Even before the pandemic, China's consumption as a percentage of GDP was among the lowest in the world. Economists say that weak demand has dampened appetite to invest in the private sector. In fact, the gap between consumption and investment is deeper than Japan's was before it entered its so-called lost decade of stagnation in the 1990s. And remember post-pandemic revenge spending? Well, unlike the West, that never really happened in China. People were largely left to fend for themselves during the health crisis. So now the question is whether China can convince households to spend more and save less, and whether that can be enough to compensate for other weak points in the economy. Ultimately, that will reveal whether this slowdown is different. In terms of what could help, a economists are watching for Communist Party measures that would boost household consumption. Think big tax cuts, unemployment benefits, higher pensions, and better public services. And yes, China's central bank did surprise markets by cutting interest rates in mid-August. But economists warn that won't be enough to make a meaningful difference. What those cuts will do is signal to markets that officials want to stimulate the economy.
Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke with Mali's military leader in a phone call on Tuesday about the recent coup in Niger. That's according to a social media post from Mali's interim president, posted on social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter. The call adds to growing fears from the West over Russia's influence in Western Africa. Niger has strategic significance for the United States, China, Europe, and Russia, and has served as a hub for foreign forces fighting a regional Islamist insurgency. It also has a wealth of uranium and oil resources. In a statement, the Kremlin said the call was initiated by Mali and was focused on ending the situation, quote, through peaceful, political, and diplomatic means. As the West loses influence in the region, support for Russia has grown. Since President Mohamed Bazoum was ousted in late July, coup supporters have been seen at rallies, waving Russian flags. Military leaders in Mali and Burkina Faso have kicked out troops from former colonial power France, while strengthening ties with Moscow. Under Bazoum, Niger remained a Western ally. The US, France, Germany, and Italy have troops stationed there under agreements with the now deposed civilian government. Putin has called for a return to constitutional order in Niger, while Wagner's chief has welcomed the army takeover and offered his services.
A South African woman was found guilty on Wednesday of murdering her 3 young daughters in New Zealand. Lauren Ann Dickerson killed her 2-year-old twins and their 6-year-old sister in September 2021. That was a month after the family had emigrated from South Africa to live in Timaru, a city of 29,000 in the South Island. New Zealand media have previously reported that Dickerson's husband found the 3 children dead and his wife in a serious condition after arriving home from a dinner with colleagues. Media said a jury came to a majority verdict that Dickerson was not insane at the time of the killings and was guilty of murder, following a month-long trial. The judge remanded Dickerson to custody in a hospital psychiatric unit until her sentencing. She has been in hospital since the murders.
Since the Taliban swept to power in Afghanistan 2 years ago, Mariam's life has taken a series of drastic twists and turns. The 27-year-old used to work as a database officer for an international education project. But then the Taliban took over and the project was closed. Mariam lost her job. She became a teacher at a private school for girls, but was only able to hold on to that role for a year before the Taliban-led administration banned girls from attending high schools and universities. Refusing to give up, Mariam opened a sewing workshop 6 months ago, taking advantage of a course she attended 4 years ago. She's trained 15 former colleagues who were also unemployed to sew traditional Afghan clothes and hijabs.
I never turned back, nor did I ever give up. I continued on my path. Although there are no educational opportunities after the Taliban closed schools and universities, our minds can't be restricted. We can use our minds and fight against them. We should not miss opportunities or make excuses and give in to obstacles.
The Taliban entered the capital Kabul in August 2021, forcing the US-backed President Ashraf Ghani to flee. Afghan security forces, set up with years of Western support, disintegrated. The lives of women there have changed dramatically since, and the rights and freedoms they enjoyed during 2 decades of rule by Western-backed governments continue to ebb away.
I didn't think that the Taliban would take over the country one day, and after they succeeded, the restrictions on women have increased day by day and caused us many problems. As far as I'm concerned, the victory day of the Taliban is the worst day for the people of Afghanistan.
I don't feel good and I'm not happy about this day. Right now, the Taliban are not ruling the country in the interest of the people. I don't understand why they are so negative about women. They said they were able to provide security for the people, but there hasn't been much better security.
The Taliban say they respect women's rights in line with their interpretation of Islamic law. The group has stopped most Afghan female staff from working at aid agencies. They've closed beauty salons, barred women from parks, and curtailed travel for women in the absence of a male guardian. Afghanistan is seemingly enjoying peace it's not seen in decades, though. The country's UN representative says that corruption has been reduced, and there are also signs that a Taliban ban on narcotics cultivation has dramatically reduced poppy production in what has for years been the world's biggest source of opium. Despite that, the UN says there have been dozens of attacks on civilians, some of those claimed by the Islamic State rivals of the Taliban.
Millions of people are running out of food in Sudan. That's the warning from the United Nations on Tuesday. Some are dying due to lack of healthcare after 4 months of war that have devastated the capital, Khartoum, and sparked ethnically driven attacks in Darfur. UN agencies said in a joint statement that time is running out for farmers to plant the crops to feed them and their neighbours, and medical supplies are scarce, adding that, quote, the situation is spiralling out of control. The UN spokesman for the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is Jens Larker.
These leaders of global humanitarian organizations warn that the war is destroying people's lives and their homeland and violating their basic human rights. They call on the parties to the conflict to end the fighting, protect civilians, and give humanitarian organizations unfettered access to all people in need in all areas of Sudan.
The conflict between Sudan's army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces erupted on April 15th over tensions linked to a planned transition to civilian rule. More than 4 million people have been displaced. That includes more than 1 million people who are estimated to have fled to neighbouring countries, according to new figures from the International Organization for Migration. Civilians in war-affected states have been killed in attacks. Elizabeth Throssell is spokesperson for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Now, while it's difficult to establish an exact number of casualties due to the intensity of the fighting and the fact that the remains of many of those killed have not been collected, identified or buried, tentative figures indicate that more than 4,000 people have so far been killed.
The millions who remain in Khartoum and cities in the Darfur and Kordofan regions have faced rampant looting and long power, communications and water cuts. Efforts led by Saudi Arabia and the United States to negotiate a ceasefire in the current conflict have stalled, and humanitarian agencies have struggled to provide relief because of insecurity, looting, and bureaucratic hurdles.
China's Tencent on Wednesday posted a smaller than expected 11% rise in second quarter revenue. It comes as China's slowing economic recovery weighed on the tech giant. That as the world's largest video game company tries to recover from last year's record downturn. Tencent, which operates messaging app WeChat, said revenue reached $20.45 billion for the 3 months ended June 30th. It was lower than analyst predictions. Revenue growth hardly changed from the 10.7% rise in the first quarter. In the same period last year, Tencent posted a 1% revenue drop and its first ever sales decline. At that time, it was hit by Beijing's regulatory crackdown on the tech sector. Those concerns have now eased for China's tech giants, but the world's second largest economy failed to surge following the lift of health crisis restrictions late last year. Tencent's profit rose 41% to over $3.5 billion, as compared to the same period last year, but fell around $1 billion under the average analyst estimate. Its core gaming business experienced weaker than expected growth in the second quarter. Domestic gaming revenue stayed mostly flat, while internationally it rose 12%. Revenue from online ads stood out as one of the bright spots in Q2. It grew over a third as its TikTok-like short video service, Video Accounts, experienced increased demand.
Worries about persistent high inflation in Britain grew on Wednesday, as key measures of price growth watched by the central bank failed to ease in July. Markets were concerned despite a sharp drop in the headline inflation rate. Officials said annual consumer price inflation cooled to 6.8%, down from just under 8% in June. Wednesday's data was expected by analysts and the Bank of England. Falling energy costs drove the fall in inflation, and food prices also eased. However, Britain still has one of the highest rates of price growth in Western Europe. While it moves Britain further from October's 41-year high of 11.1%, it's still far above the central bank's 2% target. There was pressure in core and services prices that the Bank of England is watching closely. Core inflation is important as it removes volatile food and energy prices. It stayed at 6.9% in July and was unchanged from June. Services inflation mostly reflects homegrown inflation pressure from wages, and that slightly rose to 7.4%. Sterling went up slightly against the US dollar after the figures were released, and it reinforced market bets the UK central bank will keep hiking interest rates. The strength in core inflation is bad news for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. He has promised to halve inflation by the end of the year. That goal is now in question.
Tesla has cut prices for its existing inventories of Model S and Model X cars in China by almost 7%. That's according to the electric vehicle giant on Wednesday. A post from Tesla on Chinese social media platform Weibo showed the price of the Model S cut 6.7% to just under $103,500. It was previously available at a cost of around $111,000. Another premium make, the Model X, now starts from around $114,700, down 6.9% from before. Tesla's latest cut comes just days after it announced another round of slashing prices in China. On Monday, the automaker lowered the price for its Model Ys long-range and performance versions. This triggered concerns for market watchers around its profit margins. The moves come after sales of Tesla's China-made vehicles fell by close to a third in July from June. It was the carmaker's first month-on-month decline since December. That as Tesla stopped some production to prepare for a revamped Model 3 launch. July's numbers were in contrast to rival BYD. The Chinese car company saw sales rise last month.
As China's job market shrinks, a rush of newcomers is oversaturating gig economy jobs like ride-hailing. It's eating into the income of existing full-timers like Li Wei-min and dragging out his work hours. He's near Shanghai's most prominent train station, which used to be a hot pickup spot. But he's out of luck, or possibly the competition for customers is now just much tougher.
I must persist because after all, due to the effects of the pandemic, even if I want to give up this job, it's difficult to find other jobs now. There is no other job to find.
China saw 400,000 new registered ride-hailing drivers in the sector between April and July, flooding the market with a 7% surge. It comes as the world's second-largest economy has sputtered, trying to pivot out of some of the world's harshest lockdowns, with youth unemployment soaring. China's Statistics Bureau said on Tuesday it would suspend releasing youth jobless data after record high readings, over a fifth unemployed as of June. Market analyst Wang Ke points out ride-hailing naturally became the first choice for quick cash for a growing number of jobless people.
Because of the impact of 3 years of the pandemic, many companies and small enterprises may have gone bankrupt or gone out of business, so a lot of idle labor will enter the market. There's also been a sharp decline in the number of jobs. There are some advantages from the perspective of ride-hailing. First of all, it has a higher degree of freedom than other jobs. Compared to a job where you need to clock in at work, you can pick up customers or just stop working whenever you want to stop. Second, online ride-hailing has a relatively low threshold for entry.
Some cities like Shanghai have suspended issuing new ride-hailing permits. But even with less drivers, economists say making a living is likely to become more difficult for many people in China as it enters a period of much slower economic growth. For many in the ride-hailing sector, each day is bleaker than the last, working longer hours to earn the same money they did months ago. It's the only option for those with family to support, like Zhu Jimin, who spends 15 hours behind the wheel.
The only thing on my mind every day is just making money, because our parents are getting old. My kids are going to junior high, high school. Conditions for my family aren't great. So why am I so hardworking? It's because there are a lot of ways my family needs to use the money.
Russia's central bank took action to support the struggling ruble on Tuesday. It hiked its key interest rate by 350 basis points to 12%. The move comes after the ruble fell past the 100 threshold against the dollar on Monday. On the same day, President Vladimir Putin's economic advisor Maxim Oreshkin criticized the central bank. He blamed what he called its soft monetary policy for weakening the ruble. Hours after Oreshkin's public criticism, the bank announced the emergency meeting. Analysts largely agreed the move would not have a long-lasting impact, particularly as the war in Ukraine drags on. The Russian economy has been hit by Western sanctions and soaring military spending. Yevgeny Nadorshin is chief economist at PF Capital.
The problem is that the instrument which the central bank has chosen is not the most efficient in the short term as I see it right now. But yes, it looks like it was enough in order to set a barrier around 3-digit exchange rates. So the market no longer tries to attack it. And yesterday the dollar passed below, it slipped below that on the news that the central bank intends to intervene. But we don't see much of a success. In the morning, there were movements towards like 95, 93 rubles per dollar, but this ended up pretty quickly.
The central bank last made an emergency rate hike in February last year with a raise to 20%. It then steadily lowered the cost of borrowing to 7.5% as strong inflation pressure eased. Since its last cut in September, the bank had held rates before an eventual 100 basis point hike to 8.5% at its last scheduled meeting in July. The next rate decision is due on September 15th. Annual inflation is now above the central bank's 4% target and speeding up. Russia's widening budget deficit and a labour shortage have contributed to rising inflationary pressure this year. But the ruble's quick slide from around 70 against the dollar at the start of the year to more than 100 on Monday pushed the central bank to act. The bank blames the ruble's slide on Russia's shrinking current account surplus, which is down 85% year on year in January to July.
Shares in the Vietnamese electric vehicle startup VinFast surged amid thin trading on its Wall Street debut on Tuesday and saw its market value hit more than $85 billion. That number surpassed U.S. automakers Ford at $48 billion and General Motors at $46 billion. VinFast is the auto arm of Vietnam's biggest company, Vingroup, and founded by Vietnam's richest man, Pham Nhat Phong. He has hoped to take on industry leader Tesla in the North American market, with a $4 billion factory being built in North Carolina. Tuesday's listing came after a successful merger with a cash shell company that granted VinFast a listing where it wants to be. And the company says it expects to raise money from global investors in 18 months. However, while the company has shipped nearly 3,000 vehicles to North America since late last year, initial sales have been slow. And S&P Global Mobility says only 137 VinFast electric vehicles have been registered in the United States through June. VinFast's CEO Letty Tutui.
It's an exciting day for us.
we're thrilled that we achieved the milestone of getting the company publicly listed in the US. That would open up the avenue to capital in the future. So yeah, we're very happy with it today.
VinFast's first quarter revenue dropped by almost half from the previous year, posting a net loss of nearly $600 million. But its founder and affiliate group have pumped billions of dollars to bolster it, a June filing revealed. The EV maker said it is moving toward cost reduction in the future.
American shoppers show no signs of slowing down. It's just the opposite. Retail sales increased more than expected in July. A report from the Commerce Department out Tuesday showed retail sales jumped 0.7% last month. That's higher than the 0.4% forecast by economists polled by Reuters. Online sales were strong, likely thanks to Amazon's popular Prime Day promotion. Consumers splurged on hobbies, sporting goods, and clothing, with grocery and department store sales also getting a boost. And Americans dined out more. Restaurants and bars, the only services category in the report, shot up 1.4% after rising 0.8% in June. Economists view dining out as a key indicator of household finances. On the flip side, sales at auto dealerships fell after rising in June. Receipts at furniture, electronics, and appliance stores also declined. Consumer demand has remained resilient despite the Federal Reserve's aggressive interest rate hikes to tame inflation. A tight labor market has kept wage gains strong, while receding inflation has also boosted consumers' purchasing power. With inflation ebbing, most economists believe the Fed is probably done raising interest rates and may steer the economy towards a soft landing rather than the recession that they had been forecasting since last year.
U.S. retail sales are up for a fourth straight month. I'm Lisa Bernhard from Reuters. Joining me today to talk about that and more is Liz Miller. She is founder and president of Summit Place Financial Advisors. Liz, what is continuing to power the U.S. consumer and what are they spending on?
So it was a great and surprising number, almost twice the consensus this morning. And, it's a mix of goods. We are seeing that the high spend on autos and gas have pulled back, but others kicked in. Last month with Amazon Prime Day, that certainly helped the non-retail store sales a bit. But we saw strength across the board in the other categories. And this is, for 4 months in a row, we've seen our consumer hang in there, which is an exciting thing in terms of a strong economy. But now it has all the experts kind of going in there. Is good news bad news? Is bad news good news trend?
So let's talk about that. The bad news, good news. Why is this potentially bad news?
So it's really great to see the U.S. consumer hanging in there. And I think the reason we're seeing that is we did get some wage growth over this inflationary period that allows consumers to keep up with their spending. We still may have a little bounce back post-COVID, but we all feel we're pretty much through that. But we are a consuming economy and that's held up and that's fabulous. But when we look to our Federal Reserve to say, at what point will they decide they've done enough? Continued consumer spending is a key component of a strong economy. So it suggests we probably can avoid a recession, but it doesn't mean the Fed has to keep raising rates. And that's what none of us know.
Okay, let's also talk today about bank stocks because they're lower today on news that credit agency Fitch may downgrade U.S. banks. Do you think that that is also a factor into whether or not the Fed will raise interest rates, given what we saw happen with the regional banks?
It's a great question to think how the Fed will think about the banking situation and some of the proposals lowering their ratings by Fitch, requiring debt, which is a proposal being thrown around right now. I do think the Federal Reserve had a very central role in the mini crisis we saw this spring. And, the rhetoric was to say, well, this was really poor management by the banks. But the Fed has to realize that raising rates had a direct impact on the portfolios of these banks, and those portfolios support their safety. So long way to say, I'm hopeful that the Fed keeps this in mind and thinks about what role they're playing in our overall economic stability, which is the definition of what they're trying to achieve.
All right, let's switch now to China's economy because that's grabbing a lot of headlines today, has for the past few days. Yesterday, the China Central Bank lowered interest rates, which kind of surprised markets, given that the Chinese economy is not as strong post-reopening as many thought it would be. Can you explain to us what is going on in China and what is the government trying to do there?
You know, the economic data keeps disappointing. By their own definition, they've got to believe that they are in a recession right now. And it's starting to have some reflections back to the Japanese economy. There was a time we talked there about a balance sheet recession, which was one in which the country could not get consumers to consume because there was such a debt overhang. Even the individual consumer was focused on deleveraging instead of spending. And it's starting to look like that's the phenomena in China. Now, one difference is, China really is such a strong central government that they have a deep toolbox of what they can do to try to stimulate things. But what I think they're finding now is that continuing to lower interest rates is not getting anyone to spend more. And they really need spending to kick in. The trend of addressing this debt overhang, that's on the right trajectory. But to get the economy both back into a growth phase, they've got to get some internal reinvestment. And really, just like us, that's most driven by their consumers.
Stocks here are down across the board. What is driving markets today? Obviously, this may touch on some things that you've already mentioned, but tell us what's driving the markets today.
I think what we're seeing in the markets today is absolutely this balancing act back and forth of trying to interpret a great retail number. I'm pleased with that number. I think it supports that we are coming out of a slowdown and we will avoid a recession. Whether it is one of many data points that encourages the Fed to raise rates more, I don't think that's going to change our trajectory at this point. What we've seen so clearly now over a year of dramatic rate hikes is that consumers and a lot of parts of our economy are digesting those interest rate moves just fine. Certainly, there are rates that are changing some investment decisions, but consumers overall have been okay. And with inflation coming down and retail sales holding strong, that should all be very good news. The real question just is the Fed frightened by good news and thinking that it's going to spur future inflationary turns?
US prosecutors say disgraced crypto mogul Sam Bankman-Fried used money he stole from customers of his FTX exchange to make more than $100 million in political donations for the 2022 midterm elections. That's according to an amended indictment on Monday. It said Bankman-Fried directed two FTX executives to donate to both Democrats and Republicans, evading finance contribution limits, and he told them to conceal where the money came from. The indictment doesn't name the two people prosecutors say he used as straw donors, but other court papers and Federal Elections Commission data show they are Nishad Singh, FTX's former engineering chief, and Ryan Salem, the former co-CEO of FTX's unit in the Bahamas. Singh pleaded guilty to fraud and campaign finance violations in February. He donated nearly $10 million to Democratic candidates and causes and said in court he knew the money came from FTX customers. FEC data showed Salem gave more than $24 million to Republican candidates and causes in the 2022 election cycle. He hasn't been charged, and in a separate court filing on Monday, prosecutors said Salem's lawyer had told them he would invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination if called to testify. Salem's lawyer did not immediately respond to requests for comment. The superseding indictment against Bankman-Fried said the 31-year-old leveraged this influence in turn to lobby Congress and regulatory agencies to support legislation and regulation he believed would make it easier for FTX to continue to accept customer deposits and grow. Bankman-Fried faces 7 counts of conspiracy and fraud over FTX's collapse in November 2022. He previously pleaded not guilty to stealing billions in customer funds to plug losses at his hedge fund, Alameda Research. He remains in jail after a judge revoked his bail over fears of witness tampering.
Africa's first Debt for Nature swap, which will fund marine conservation in Gabon, has backers hoping for more such money-saving environmental deals. But some say there's room for improvement in the increasingly popular transactions. First, let's look at what they are. At their simplest, Debt for Nature swaps see a country's debt bought up by a bank or specialist investor and replaced with cheaper loans. A development finance credit guarantee or risk insurance helps bring the cost down. The savings are meant to fund conservation. Gabon, whose beaches and coastal waters are home to the world's largest population of endangered leatherback turtles, has switched $436 million of its international bonds to a new $500 million blue bond. It has a lower interest rate and longer maturity. That's expected to generate $163 million for marine conservation projects over the next 15 years. Gabon's President Ali Bongo has said the swap is an important moment for eco-friendly finance deals in Africa. Too often, talks of these new mechanisms remain just that, he said in a statement. But in this case, we have made it a reality. Bankers have said a handful of other African countries are also working on Debt for Nature deals, along with Sri Lanka and a clutch of Caribbean and Indian Ocean islands. US non-profit, the Nature Conservancy, advised Gabon's government on its deal. Head of Sustainable Debt, Slav Gachev, said the organization expects to do between 1 and 3 deals per year until 2030. Though he would not name any countries, he said eco-friendly swaps the Nature Conservancy advises on could total $10 billion by the end of the decade. But there are question marks over how Gabon's conservation promises will be enforced, says Andrew Stanners, investment director at Aberdeen. The emerging market investor holds some of Gabon's current bonds. Stanners said the Debt for Nature deal is brilliant from a fiscal point of view. The new bond comes with just over 6% interest, much cheaper than the 9 to 10.5% yield other bonds have been trading at. The US Development Finance Corporation has provided risk insurance. That's resulted in an AA2 investment-grade credit rating from Moody's for the blue bond, a full 14 notches above the Gabonese government's own junk CAA1 grade. But Stanners also questioned how the insurance would work if Gabon did one day default. Gregory Smith, a fund manager at M&G Investments, queried why Gabon Swap had seen just $95 million bought back from a bond that needs refinancing in 2025. That's compared to $405 million of its two 2031 maturing bonds. The transaction had offered the chance to eliminate this debt risk, he wrote on the Bond Vigilantes blog. But the risk remains.
You miss the algae, brother?
Yeah, I always die with open mouth. It's not going to be funny if I wake up tomorrow morning with...
What if it's a Christian?
You never know what kind of water you go come to when it's race day, but I heard a lot of not so good things. I was pleasantly surprised, and they've told us that the water quality is good, so we just have to trust the organizer, yeah.
Omaranmi Otonuyi is dancing to music she cannot hear. The 20-year-old, who lives in Nigeria's southwest city Ibadan, lost her hearing as a young child. But growing up, she loved watching music videos and moving her body with the dancers on TV. Today, she's part of a troupe who are proving that the deaf can dance.
I'm a born dancer. I believe there is success in this, and we will continue as a team and do it till we get the success we want until my parents are proud of me.
Otunui trains at classes set up by Samuel James, who founded the Seams Deaf Pro Foundation. During the global health crisis, he organised online dance and drama challenges as a way to keep the deaf community engaged.
Deaf can dance, deaf can act, deaf can do this. They can do everything except hear.
From the best of the best, he set up the dance group.
People, when we go to a place to dance, they say, how is this possible? How are they able to work with songs, the sounds and everything is on point? How is this possible? That has been our target.
Rigorous training sessions have paid off. Otunui and her fellow dancers have performed in several states across Nigeria and participated in a virtual deaf international festival in the US.
I'm so glad we were able to show the audience what we could do. I'm excited because we made it happen. We were able to show them that deaf can actually dance.
Public performances by deaf artists are rare in Nigeria. There is little provision for people with disabilities to access cultural and artistic activities. But through hard work and talent, these dancers are tackling prejudice. And Otunui says she won't be stopping anytime soon.
Good luck, congratulations, and we will have together a great success. We welcome you to Saudi, we welcome you to Hilal, and you will win together a lot of trophies. Welcome to Hilal.
Sales of the Women's World Cup products have exceeded expectations, and the tournament's unpredictability means demand for team kits is hard to predict for leading sportswear companies. Brands like Adidas and Nike have had to move fast to meet shoppers' changing product preferences. The tournament in Australia and New Zealand promises to be among the most popular standalone women's sporting events ever held. FIFA expects viewing figures of around 2 billion, despite time zone differences that make it difficult for Europeans and Americans to tune in. Adidas and Nike and retailers like Dick's Sporting Goods and Fanatics have made significant investments in merchandise. Data showed that total sponsorship value grew to at least $349 million, up from $342 million at the last tournament in 2019. Online, Dick's has 76 clothing items and products tied to the 2023 US Women's National Team as of Monday, and Nike released a collection worn by the US team ahead of their first match, most of which are sold out. However, data shows that for Nike, which sponsors the US, England and others, only 8% of women's team products have sold out so far during the tournament. That's down from 13% of Nike's women's team products, which sold out during the previous tournament. Rival Adidas sponsors Sweden and Spain, who played a semi-final on Tuesday. Just over a fifth of women's team products have sold out so far over this year's tournament for Adidas, up from 8% in 2019. It's doubled its production of Germany women's team jerseys for this World Cup compared to the 2019 tournament, and nearly sold out before the team left the competition early. Marketing around the tournament's merchandise has centred largely on female empowerment, according to the chief of the UK-based industry association Women in Football. 1 in 3 women's soccer fans are new to the sport altogether. They added the fan base is largely youthful and diverse.
Yang Jingyu spends more than 6 hours a day talking almost non-stop into a camera. The 28-year-old is one of millions of young Chinese people who, faced with record youth unemployment, are attempting to forge a career as a live stream sales host.
喜欢表现，喜欢镜头，然后喜欢表达，然后希望每天都能够出现在镜头之下。
They use platforms such as Alibaba's Taobao to promote products online, from makeup to home appliances and even toilet paper, transforming the traditional shopping experience. Only a few months into the job, Yang had already clocked hundreds of hours of broadcasting time.
所以我之前也是模特，也是博主，所以我就后来觉得，可能主播这个工作能够更加的直观，而且通过每一场的数据，你能够反映自己的一个能力和反馈，然后会有很多直播间的评论和互动，然后综合下来这些因素都是我喜欢的，所以就选择了这个职业。
With China's youth unemployment hitting 21% in June, it's no wonder more people are turning to the sector. The live streaming industry employed 1.2 million hosts as of 2020, according to iResearch, and a pandemic-era boom in live stream sales helped the industry to generate $480 billion in business in China last year. Agencies are now springing up to train young hosts and connect suitable anchors with brands. Zhang herself works with Shanghai-based agency Remomo, an arm of brand partner Buy Quickly. Xining Li is vice president of the agency.
尤其对于我们服务的国际市场品牌，我们其实反而是更关注日销，对，因为我们基本上还是保持我们的正价策略，所以在日销的工作中，我们可能除了头部以外，也会对于中腰部的达人可能一些合作。那整体上来讲，因为现在的市场达人是逐步的，每一个细分市场都有自己足够丰满的达人内容生产者再去供给这个市场，所以我们的选择也变得更加的丰富。
Initially, the focus of live streaming was on promoting massive sales via big discounts. Now it's more about storytelling and longer-term consumer engagement. Livestream host Shi Jianing, seen here promoting T-shirts for Hugo Boss, says her focus is on building a following and developing a bond with consumers.
并不是那种很简单的说我是卖东西的，他是买东西的这么简单，因为其实毕竟咱们隔着屏幕是没有办法像咱们现在这样去面对面沟通的，它其实建立信任不是那么的容易，但是只要你能够很好的跟消费者去通过交流也好，或者你个人的一些亲和力等等也好，去变成了朋友之间的这种关系，他就会对你建立一个信任，然后就会去更加促进你们之间想要进行这个销售的一个关系的达成。
Kenya has reinstated a small fuel subsidy, the energy regulator said on Monday, in a reversal of government policy following public anger over the high cost of living. The aim is to stabilize retail fuel prices over the next 30 days. On coming to office last September, President William Ruto removed fuel and maize flour subsidies put in place by his predecessor. That was, he said, because he preferred subsidizing production rather than consumption. But the cuts have contributed to violent anti-government protests in recent months. The regulator, known as EPRA, said the maximum price of a litre of petrol would remain constant at 194.68 shillings, or $1.35. Consumers will be shielded from a 7.33 shilling increase, which the government will shoulder through a price stabilization fund. Fuel prices shot up when Ruto removed the subsidies, and again after the government doubled the fuel tax. Protests organized in response were called off last month after the opposition and Ruto agreed to talks to resolve their differences, the second such attempt this year.
Can artificial intelligence read our minds? Researchers from National University of Singapore say they have developed technology that can do just that. AI research participant Li Ruiling is getting ready to jump into an MRI machine for a brain scan. It will allow a computer to, quote, read his thoughts and recreate the visuals he is looking at.
I'm also interested in what happened in my brain and what my brain can output and what I'm thinking. So I try to participate to see what really happened on my brain.
Li is one of potentially up to 58 participants who are providing their brain scan datasets to researchers working on developing a mind-reading AI. The technique relies on scanning the brains of volunteers in a magnetic resonance imaging MRI machine.
where they are exposed to between 1,200 and 5,000 different images. The mind-reading AI called MindViz then associates the brain scans with the images and creates an individual AI model for each participant. Jia Xinqin is one of the lead researchers on the study.
So after we collect enough training data for you, we can create an individual AI model for you. And this AI model is kind of a translator. Well, it can understand your brain activities just like ChatGPT understands the natural languages of humans.
The mind reading kicks in when the same participant comes in again for a brain scan.
So next time you come in, you will do the scan, right? And in the scan, you will see the visual stimuli like this, and then we'll record your brain activities at the same time. And your brain activities will go into our AI translator, and this translator will translate your brain activities into a special language that a Stable Diffusion can understand. And then it will generate the images you are seeing at that point. So that's basically how we can read your mind in this sense.
The technology is not able to mind read the general public yet. Unlike scenes from science fiction movies, this AI system is modeled to individual participants. And there are also the possible risks of the datasets being assessed without consent and the relative lack of legislations in AI research. Joan Helen Zhao is the Associate Professor at NUS Medicine.
The privacy concerns is the first important thing. And then people might be worried, right, whether the information we provided here might be accessed or shared without prior consent. So the thing to address this is we should have very strict guidelines, ethical and law in terms of how to protect the privacy.
Still, the scientists are excited about the possibilities of a mind-reading AI system. One of the lead researcher, Chen Zijiao, explains.
Say for some subject, some patient without mobility, maybe we can help him to control their robots and their phone, communicate with others, just using their thoughts instead of speech if that person couldn't speak at that time.
نحن آخر معلمين أنا واثنين بعد بضاعة اللي بعدنا بنشتغل فخار برغم كل هذه الظروف الصعبة اللي عم نمرق فيها والأزمات الاقتصادية. أول شيء لا تستمر بهالمهنة بدك ماديات، بدك دعم. نحن هون رشية ضيعة قروية فيها تمتاز بصناعة الفخار أبا عن جد منذ مئات لا بل ما بنعرف يمكن من ألوف السنين. بس نحن وصلنا لمرحلة خلال الأحداث اللي مرقت من 30 سنة أو 35 سنة لليوم بلشت تتراجع وتنقرض. كان بالستينات في 80 معمل بهذه الضيعة، معامل قائمة وتعمل بشكل كميات كبيرة، وكل التصريف كل الانتاج كان يتصرف بجنوب بجبل عامل نوصل للدمور مثلا للبقاع.
This is Reuters.